What am I doing? Making videos today? This is crazy. This is number 3. Actually, more if you count the ones I've trashed. But anyway, I did just want to say as a response to a couple of my videos that I made earlier and some of the discussion with Kazumi, which I appreciate. I appreciate the dialogue. I mentioned in my last upload a little bit about tribalism, and I just wanted to say I'm not trying to demean you in any way, Kazumi, by bringing that up. I meant that more in the broader sense, although, I think we're all subject to it in a lot of ways. I think it's everywhere, right? It's in all our sports teams, it's in our political system, it's in the way we interact with one another. And I think that it doesn't serve us all that well. It may be some remnant of an evolutionary process, but anymore, I think it sometimes serves to do us a disservice, at least if we have an unthinking adherence to it. If we have an unthinking, we sort of like an instinctive response. I don't think that's good. I think introspection and being aware of it, I think it needs to be illuminated. And I think there's some tribalism at play here. It was also mentioned in the comments section of one of my videos that quite often some of the people on the left, I got to use some terms here, who oppose Gamergate or Gamergaters are often guilty of some pretty awful tactics themselves. Some of it's overt, and some of it's a little bit more under the surface, kind of passive-aggressive, you might say. I would say that sometimes those people who are used to being engaged in social movements and things like that are a little more cunning than your average gamer who may have been drawn into Gamergate simply because they've heard about the controversy, but they're not often involved in social issues. And they'll use this sort of passive-aggressive maneuver, mischaracterizing, misrepresenting, to draw out someone's frustration and evoke the very response that they're getting. And then they sort of win by default. As Kazumi said, what you say doesn't matter, how you say it matters, right? So even if you're right, that doesn't matter, which I'm not so sure about. I think, facts don't change based on how you say them. If they're right, they're right. But that's an attempt to draw that out and then say, aha, see, you farted, right? So that's something that, I didn't touch on in my first couple of videos, but I think is very important to keep in mind. If we're going to be talking about discourse here, we got to talk about that kind of stuff too, because ultimately sometimes that's a lot more underhanded and conniving than someone lashing out, right? The lashing out is at least fairly obvious. One more thing about labels and groups and responsibility and personal responsibility versus group responsibility. Kazumi had asked in my comments section, what about the Indiana case where, you've got a group of religious people who are doing all kinds of things in the name of religion. Do we treat them as individuals? Well, in that case, I would say no, because again, the very charter or the tenets of the ideology that they all claim to be a part of actually calls for, that's what they're referring to directly in their attempts to have, legislation passed and that sort of thing. So I think that's a little bit of a different case because, of course, the ideology itself is what's in question here. And that relates to a video that I just watched where I don't know if he's a congressman or what, I have to go back to the computer. Representative Jason Brodeur says that homosexuals are not a protected class. And of course, he's using, some snippets of the law here and there to actually say that religious freedoms are more protected than homosexuals as a class. And this is the problem with dividing all this up, I think, beyond the religious lines. Because here's a guy who's using these statutes or laws or whatever to define what level, what hierarchy of protected classes you're a member of, and that the religious are protected by the highest form of protection, and homosexuals as a class are protected by the lowest. And of course, I think it's unfortunate because then what's happening, of course, is when we're talking about classes here, they're using the laws not to discriminate against a class of people. They're not discriminating against gays all at once. They're discriminating against individuals, and they're doing it based on a specific characteristic of that individual, but then they're claiming, of course, the right to do that based on this hierarchical class structure deal. And I think ultimately, I'm a little bit more of a proponent of freedom of association So again, I don't want to get too much involved in that discussion. But by the same token, we've got individual freedoms. And I think once you start protecting specific classes based on specific special cases, you're then no longer treating everyone as individuals, and you're no longer treating everyone as equal in any form or fashion. And I think that's where some of the problems start. That's where you get this myriad labyrinth of laws and confusion that creates ridiculous videos like this one that I just watched. So anyway, I'd be interested to hear what you think as always, and have a good day.